The unofficial diagnosis. Your mom's lonely, and I'm a cure. The lights in the university medical lab were stark, casting a sterile glare on Lyra Vance's face, making her pale skin look almost translucent. She stood before me, her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt, a gesture so uncharacteristic it felt like a hallucination. After all, Lyra was the undisputed ice queen of Blackwood University. Guys who dared to venture within 10 feet of her were usually frozen solid by a single withering glance. But today, she had sought me out. "Kale," she began, her voice a pitch lower than usual, laced with a tremor she couldn't quite hide. "Can you do me a favor?" I slowly set down the test tube I was holding and looked up, taking my time to study her. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and the dark circles under her eyes were a dead giveaway she hadn't slept well in a long time. The collar of her button-down shirt was slightly open, revealing the delicate curve of her collarbone, which seemed to glow under the harsh laboratory lights. "Oh," I raised an eyebrow. "The great Lyra Vance needs a favor from me?" She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself, and pulled a folded document from her bag. She pushed it across the stainless steel table toward me. "My mom's sick." I glanced down at the paper. It was a lab report, a dense list of tests with the same glaring word next to each one. "Normal." "The hospital can't find anything wrong," Lyra said, her voice quiet but tight with a frantic energy. "She's been getting dizzy spells. Her hands and feet are always cold, night sweats, but every single test comes back clean." I narrowed my eyes, my fingers drumming a light rhythm on the tabletop. "So," she bit her lower lip, a nervous habit of hers. "That your family, they're into herbal medicine, naturopathy?" I smiled. So that's what this was about. I knew more about her than she thought. From the first day of freshman year, I'd noticed the campus's resident ice queen, who always walked alone. What she didn't know was that my father and her mother had been classmates in college. I'd seen a younger Serafina Vance in my family's old photo albums, a woman who is still, by all accounts, stunning. "So you want me to treat your mother?" I deliberately drew out the words, my gaze wandering over her. My stare made her uncomfortable. The tips of her ears turned a faint pink, but she held my gaze and nodded stubbornly. "Yes." I let out a soft chuckle and pulled a heavy, leather-bound book from my drawer. I casually flipped through the aged pages until I found what I was looking for, tapping the text with my finger. "Vital energy deficiency and imbalance of core elements," I said. Then I looked up at her. "In layman's terms, your mom is missing a man in her life." I leaned forward slightly. "Specifically me." Lyra's face flushed a deep crimson. "You?" She raised her hand as if to slap me, but caught herself at the last second. Her chest heaved, the buttons on her shirt straining against the fabric. "Kale, my mother is sick and you're making crude jokes." "Who's joking?" I closed the book and adopted a serious expression. The Hayes Apothecary Guide notes that women who live alone for extended periods are prone to stagnated energy and elemental imbalance. The symptoms include cold extremities, a pale complexion, night sweats, and even, I paused for effect, insomnia, vivid dreams, and a feeling of being constantly overheated. More importantly, your mom's ailment is a matter of the heart, and it's a sickness only I can cure. Lyra froze, her expression unreadable. It was obvious my words had hit their mark. "Then what's the treatment?" she asked, the words catching in her throat. A slow, meaningful smile spread across my face. "Crimson root and silver sage." Lyra's expression was a spectacle to behold. The word was practically ground out between her teeth. "Are you messing with me?" "A healer's heart is a doctor's orders," I said with a shrug. "The crimson root restores vitality and strengthens the core, while silver sage calms the spirit and nourishes the blood. The combination is a classic remedy for this specific kind of deficiency." I opened my phone's photo gallery and showed her a picture of a gnarled, reddish root in our family's apothecary cabinet. "This is a genuine specimen from my family's private collection. You can't find this quality on the open market. And that," I added, "is why I said your mom needs me." "Don't project your dirty thoughts onto my noble intentions, Lyra." She stared at the photo, her face flushed, her breathing noticeably quicker. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Half of her thought the remedy was absurd, but the other half couldn't deny my family's long-standing reputation in the world of alternative medicine. Even if you're telling the truth," she finally said, her voice hoarse. How is this medicine administered? How long does it take? 1 dose every night for a month, I said, watching her reaction closely. And in what? And someone needs to observe the effects of the dosage in real time to make adjustments as needed, which means I'll need to be at your house every night to prepare the tonic and personally monitor your mother's reaction. I looked directly into her eyes. The lab fell into a dead silence. Lyra's face grew paler, her nails digging so hard into her palms they were probably leaving marks. I knew how outrageous the request was, to have a guy she barely knew coming to her house every night in the same space as her single mother. But I also knew that for Serafina's sake, the proud Lyra Vance would agree. Fine, as expected, she bit out the word a moment later, but on one condition: I'm there the whole time. I smiled. Of course, I welcome the supervision. And just like that, our strange deal was struck. Outside, the last rays of the setting sun streamed through the window, casting a golden halo around Lyra's profile. I looked at her tightly pressed lips, her trembling eyelashes, and the faint outline of her waist beneath her shirt, and a single thought crossed my mind. This game is going to be very interesting. 2. The night visit. 3 days later, I stood at the front door of the Vance house, carrying a leather case filled with herbs. The evening air was humid and heavy after a recent rain, and the drone of cicadas was a constant buzzing soundtrack to the twilight. I rang the doorbell. I could hear the soft padding of slippers on a hardwood floor, followed by the click of the lock. The door swung open. Lyra stood there, dressed in a loose white t-shirt and shorts. Her hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, with a few stray strands framing her face, making her look softer than she did at school. Her toenails were painted a pale, delicate pink. "Come in," she said, her tone cool as she stepped aside, but her eyes darted immediately to the case in my hand. I followed her into the living room, a scent of faint jasmine in the air. The space was immaculate, with plush pillows arranged on the sofa and a cup of still-steaming herbal tea on the coffee table. "My mom's in the kitchen," Lyra said, gesturing vaguely. Her voice was strained. "She said she wanted to cook to thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "That formal?" Lyra just grunted in response and led me toward the back of the house. A graceful figure was busy at the stove. Serafina Vance, Lyra's mother, was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. She wore a simple light blue sundress with a white apron tied at her waist. Her dark hair was loosely pinned up, revealing the elegant nape of her neck. Hearing us, she turned and offered a small smile. "You must be Kale," she said. Her voice was warm, like honey. "Lyra's mentioned you." I gave a polite nod. "Hello, Mrs. Vance." Serafina's skin was fair, but wasn't as sickly pale. It was the kind of complexion that glowed with a soft, pinkish undertone, like high-grade alabaster. Her eyes were just like Lyra's, but her gaze was softer, warmer. When she smiled, fine lines appeared at the corners of her eyes, which only added to her mature, captivating charm. "Dinner's almost ready. Make yourself comfortable," she said, wiping her hands on her apron and gesturing toward the living room. "Lyra, honey, pour Kale some tea." Lyra reluctantly went to pour the tea, while I took the opportunity to assess Serafina's condition. Her lips were a little pale, and there were faint shadows under her eyes, classic signs of a vital energy deficiency. But even so, she radiated a certain luminosity, like a well-cared-for piece of porcelain you couldn't help but want to touch. "Lyra told me you're Silas Hayes' son," Serafina asked as she stirred something in a pan. I nodded. "You knew my father?" "We were in college together," she said with a light laugh, her eyes crinkling. "He wrote me more than a few love letters back in the day." The comment nearly made me choke on my own saliva. My reaction seemed to amuse Serafina, and her laugh was clear and musical as she turned. The apron strings cinched her slender waist, and the hem of her dress swayed, revealing a glimpse of a smooth calf. Lyra returned with my tea just in time to see this, and her expression immediately darkened. "Mom." Her tone was sharp. "The food is burning." Serafina turned back to the stove. Lyra placed the teacup down on a coffee table with a little too much force, sloshing a few drops onto the wood. "Careful, it's hot," she said coldly. I picked up the cup, blowing on it gently, but my eyes remained fixed on Serafina in the kitchen. Her movements were fluid and practiced as she cooked. Her wrists were slim, her fingers long and elegant. Every so often, She'd lift a hand to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, revealing a delicate earlobe and the soft line of her neck. A small mole was visible just below her collarbone, a tiny speck of ink on a canvas of snow, sparking the imagination. Lyra followed my gaze, and her face grew even darker. "Had enough of a look?" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. I pulled my eyes away from the kitchen and smiled at her. "Your mom is very beautiful." Lyra's fingers tightened around her own cup, her knuckles turning white. For a second, I thought she might throw its contents in my face. Just then, Serafina emerged, carrying a platter of food. "Dinner's ready," she announced cheerfully. Her eyes darted between me and Lyra, and though she seemed to sense the tension, she said nothing, offering another gentle smile instead. Dinner was more impressive than I'd expected. Serafina was an excellent cook. The roast chicken was tender and juicy, the asparagus was crisp, and a rich, fragrant soup simmered in a tranche. She kept putting food on my plate, using her own fork first for herself, then for me, then for herself, then for me again, all while asking about my studies and my life. Her voice so gentle it was as if she were talking to her own son. Lyra, meanwhile, was completely silent, her head down as she ate, only occasionally shooting a weary glance in my direction. After dinner, I took out the herbs and began preparing the tonic in the kitchen. The crimson root had a pungent, earthy smell, which mingled with the sweet aroma of the silver sage to create a strange, almost heady fragrance. Curious, Serafina came over and stood beside me, leaning in slightly to look at the simmering pot. "That's new," she said, sniffing lightly, her brow furrowed. "It's unique. The crimson root is quite potent," I explained, carefully managing the flame. "Mrs. Vance, you should go rest. I'll call you when it's ready." But instead, she pulled a stool over and sat down. "I'll keep you company." Her eyes seemed exceptionally bright in the warm kitchen light, as if they were holding back water. I noticed her cheeks were more flushed than before, perhaps from the steam, or perhaps my gaze drifted involuntarily to her neckline. The sundress wasn't low-cut, but as she leaned forward, I could see the smooth expanse of her skin and the subtle shadow between her breasts. Suddenly, Lyra was at the kitchen doorway, holding a glass of water. "Mom, drink this," she said, her voice stiff, her eyes locked on me in a clear warning. Serafina took the glass with a smile and a thank you. Lyra didn't leave. She crossed her arms and leaned against the door frame, watching us like a hawk. Once the tonic was ready, Serafina drank it down without a moment's hesitation. I watched her face, waiting for a reaction. After a few minutes, a soft blush bloomed on her cheeks, and her breathing became a little faster. "I feel warm," she said, fanning her collar lightly. Her voice was huskier than before. "But it's a good feeling. My hands and feet are warming up." Lyra stood to the side, her expression a mixture of disbelief and relief as she stared at the healthy color returning to her mother's face. That night, as planned, I stayed to observe. Serafina went to her room early, and Lyra tossed a set of blankets and a pillow onto the living room sofa. "I'm sleeping here," she announced coldly, "just in case someone decides to wander around in the middle of the night." I just shook my head and went to the guest room. Late into the night, I heard faint footsteps. I opened my door to see Serafina tiptoeing toward the kitchen for a glass of water. She was wearing a silk nightgown that looked like a watercolor painting in the moonlight, the fabric flowing around her, outlining her graceful curves. "Mrs. Vance, are you feeling unwell?" I asked softly. She jumped, startled, and nearly slipped on the floor. I instinctively reached out and caught her, my hand closing around her soft arm, her scent of jasmine filling the air. "The tonic is a little strong," she whispered, her voice even deeper now, with an indescribable softness. "I'm so thirsty." I poured her a glass of warm water. As I handed it to her, my fingers brushed against hers. Her skin was unusually hot. Her eyelashes fluttered, casting long shadows in the moonlight. "Thank you," she said quietly, but she didn't move away. She just stood there looking at me, her eyes hazy and unfocused. At the end of the hall, Lyra's bedroom door was open just a crack. A pair of eyes watched us from the darkness. 3. A secret in the moonlight. Serafina's fingertips lingered in my palm for 3 seconds longer than was polite. Moonlight slanted through the kitchen window, rendering her silk nightgown nearly transparent. I could clearly see the shadow beneath her collarbone rise and fall with each breath, and the faint outline of the tie at her waist. The heat of her body seeped through the thin fabric, a full degree warmer than normal. "Serafina, are you?" I started to say, but a soft click echoed from the hallway. Serafina pulled her hand back as if jolted from a dream, turning toward the sound. Lyra's door was now shut tight, but the sliver of light beneath it wavered, as if someone had just retreated in a hurry. "That must be Lyra getting up," Serafina said, pulling the collar of her nightgown tighter. Her voice had returned to its usual gentle tone. "You should get some rest too." She turned and walked away, the hem of her nightgown brushing against my leg, stirring a breeze scented with jasmine and herbs. I stood there watching her disappear into the master bedroom before I returned to my room. The clock on the nightstand read 2:17 a.m. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the image of Serafina's skin glowing like a pearl in the moonlight, her eyes misty and full of unspoken words. The Crimson Root tonic was more potent than I'd anticipated, or rather, Serafina was far more sensitive to it than the average person. Just as my thoughts began to drift, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Lyra. An iMessage. "Meet me at the entrance to the neighborhood, 7 a.m. Don't let my mom see you leave." At 6 a.m., I was at the designated spot 10 minutes early. The summer morning fog hadn't yet burned off, and the air was thick with a damp smell of grass and earth. Lyra was already there, dressed in a black sweatsuit, her hair pulled into a high, tight ponytail that exposed the pale skin of her neck. Her face, free of makeup in the morning light, looked remarkably clear, but also highlighted the dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes. "What did you do to my mother last night?" she demanded, her voice a harsh whisper that couldn't conceal its trembling. I casually punched a straw into a carton of chocolate milk. I prepared her tonic, observed its effects, and recorded her reactions, exactly as we agreed. "Don't play dumb." She snatched the milk out of my hand, her nails digging into the cardboard. I saw you touching her hand." I looked at her reddened eyes and suddenly understood. Lyra's anger was a mask for something much more complex. "Are you worried about your mother?" I said, stepping closer until I could smell the faint scent of shampoo in her hair. "Or are you jealous?" Lyra recoiled as if she'd been burned. The milk carton burst in her hand, splattering onto both our sneakers. Her chest heaved, a small patch of her sweatshirt darkened with sweat, hinting at the light-colored sports bra underneath. What the hell are you talking about?" Her voice shot up an octave before she forced it back down. "I'm just warning you, don't even think about taking advantage of my mom's illness." "Lyra," I cut her off, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket. "This is a record of your mother's visits to a psychiatrist for the past 6 months. Her face went rigid. The paper fluttered in the morning breeze, the prescription for a potent antidepressant clearly visible. I'd found the slips late last night, tucked away in the back of a drawer in Serafina's vanity while they slept. "You already knew," I stated, not as a question. "That's why you agreed to my terms, even when the remedy sounded completely insane." Lyra's lips started to tremble. In the soft light, I could see the fine, downy hairs on her cheeks quiver. She lunged forward and grabbed the front of my shirt, her grip surprisingly strong. "If you tell anyone," she hissed, her breath hot on my face, smelling of mint toothpaste, "I'll tell the entire school you've been setting up hidden cameras in the women's locker room." I couldn't help but laugh. That's a pretty weak threat. Doesn't really fit the whole Ice Queen persona. She let go and spun around to leave. I grabbed her wrist. Her skin was smooth but cool to the touch, a stark contrast to her mother's. "Your mother needs more than just herbs, Lyra," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "She needs to be loved, to be needed, to be treated like a woman, not just Lyra's mom." Lyra's eyes suddenly filled with tears. She violently wrenched her arm free and ran, disappearing into the morning fog like a wounded deer. When I got back to the house, Serafina was in the kitchen making breakfast. She changed into a canary yellow dress, a white lace apron tied at her waist, her hair loosely pinned up with a wooden hair stick. She turned when she heard the door, a gentle smile grazing her lips. "Back from your morning run?" she asked, flipping a pancake. "Where's Lyra?" "She's right behind me," I said, moving to her side. I pretended to grab a plate, using the moment to get a closer look at her. The tonic's effects were still lingering. Serafina's lips were a shade rosier than yesterday, and the corners of her eyes had a soft pink glow, like peach blossoms in spring. When she reached for a spice jar on a high shelf, the neckline of her dress gaped slightly, revealing the small mole beneath her collarbone and a patch of skin flushed with a warm, rosy hue. "You have wonderful color today, Serafina," I said, taking the jar from her. Our fingers brushed. She let out a soft hum, her lashes lowered, casting a shadow on her cheeks. The tips of her ears turned red, as if touched by the dawn. The kitchen door swung open. Lyra stood there, her gaze falling on our hands, which were almost touching. Her face went white. "I bought some orange juice," she said stiffly, dropping a paper bag on the table with a thud. A carton tipped over and juice spilled across the table, dripping onto Serafina's slippers. "Oh dear." Serafina bent down to clean it up, the hem of her dress riding up, revealing a slender ankle and a strip of smooth calf. Lyra suddenly rushed forward, grabbing the paper towels. "I'll get it." She moved so quickly that her elbow slammed into my ribs. I grunted, and Serafina immediately leaned in, her face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" Her light jasmine scent washed over me, mixed with the smell of pancakes, and for some reason, it reminded me of home. I shook my head, but my eyes caught Lyra's. She was staring at us, the paper towels in her hand twisted into a mangled rope. Breakfast was a quiet, tense affair. Serafina, sensing the mood, kept glancing between me and Lyra before finally letting out a soft sigh. "Lyra," she said, placing a pancake on her daughter's plate, "how about you and I go shopping today?" Lyra looked up, her expression complicated. "Okay. Kale, you should come too," Serafina said, turning to me, her eyes curving into a gentle smile. "You can help me carry my bags." Lyra's fork clattered onto her plate. 4. Retail therapy. The air conditioning in the Prudential Center was blasting, but Serafina kept fanning herself with her hand. "This remedy, it's really something," she murmured, her fingers unconsciously tracing the skin near her collarbone. She had already discreetly pulled the neckline of her yellow dress a little lower, revealing that patch of rosy, delicate skin. Lyra walked 10 feet ahead of us, her back as stiff as a board. She hadn't made eye contact with me all morning, even shrugging off her mother's attempt to hold her hand. "Feeling warm, Serafina?" I asked, deliberately slowing my pace to walk beside her. "That's a normal reaction. It means your circulation is improving." She nodded, her lashes casting feathery shadows under the mall's bright lights. As we passed a high-end lingerie store, she hesitated for a moment. The window display featured several sets of lace sleepwear. A water blue one seemed almost transparent under the spotlights. "I'm going to get a bottle of water," Lyra announced abruptly, turning and heading for the escalators without a backward glance. Serafina watched her daughter go, another soft sigh escaping her lips. Her fingers fiddled with the strap of her purse, but her gaze lingered on the blue nightgown. "Blue would look beautiful on you," I said in a low voice, "like that nightgown you were wearing when you fainted." The tips of her ears instantly turned scarlet. You saw that? "When I carried you back to your room," I said, meeting her eyes. "It was beautiful." Serafina's breathing quickened. She bit her lower lip, then, as if making a sudden decision, pushed open the door to the lingerie store. "Help me choose," she said, looking back at me, a rare playful glint in her eyes. "After all, I need something that works with the treatment." The shop smelled of cloyingly sweet perfume. Serafina moved between the racks, her fingertips gliding over fine lace and smooth silk. I sat on a velvet bench outside the fitting rooms, watching as a sales associate recommended the water blue set along with a black, see-through number. "Sir, your girlfriend has excellent taste," the associate said, smiling at me. "This Midnight Passion set is one of our best sellers." Serafina's face was so red it looked like it might catch fire, but she didn't correct her. She hurried into the fitting room. Just before the curtain closed, I saw her trembling fingers fumbling with the buttons on her dress. The sounds from within the fitting room were unearthly clear, the rustle of fabric, the clink of metal hangers, and a soft, stifled moan. "Kale." Serafina's voice, muffled by the curtain, sounded thick with moisture. "Can you help me with the tie in the back?" The moment I pulled back the curtain, the blood rushed to my head. Serafina stood with her back to me, wearing only the black lingerie set. Delicate lace traced the curve of her waist like ivy on a marble statue. The crisscrossing ties on her back were loose, revealing a wide expanse of smooth skin that was flushed a deep, unnatural red. "The tonic, it's too strong," she said, her voice trembling. "Help me loosen the ties." My fingers had barely touched her back when she shuddered violently. Her skin was burning hot, and tiny beads of sweat were trickling down the valley of her spine. "Mom." Lyra's voice was like a thunderclap. She stood at the entrance to the fitting area, a bottle of water crushed in her hand, her knuckles white. Her gaze shot from her mother's nearly naked back to my hand suspended in midair, finally landing on Serafina's flushed face. Time seemed to freeze. Serafina frantically grabbed her dress to cover herself, the straps of the lingerie slipping from her shoulders. Lyra suddenly turned and bolted from the store, knocking over a mannequin in her haste. "Lyra!" Serafina cried out, trying to run after her, but she tripped on a scattered piece of lingerie. She stumbled, and I caught her by the waist. "I'll go," I said, taking the dress from her. "Get dressed. You're drawing attention." My eyes betrayed me, glancing down at her chest. The black lingerie did little to conceal anything. The skin beneath the lace was a tempting shade of pink, rising and falling with her ragged breaths. Serafina grabbed my wrist. "Don't tell her." Her palm was scorching hot, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears like melting spring snow. I found Lyra in the emergency stairwell. She was huddled in a corner, her face buried in her knees, her shoulders shaking. When she heard my footsteps, she looked up, her red-rimmed eyes filled with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "Pervert." She grabbed an empty soda can and threw it at me. "What the hell were you two doing?" I caught the can and crouched down in front of her. "Your mother was trying on clothes." "Does trying on clothes require you to be all handsy with her?" Lyra's voice cracked with a sob. "Does it require her to wear that? That shameless piece of—" "Lyra," I interrupted, "do you know about the side effects of antidepressants?" She froze. Diminished libido, emotional numbness. I continued, moving closer. "Your mother hasn't really felt anything in years, not until she started my treatment." Lyra's breath hitched. "So you took the opportunity to." "I'm treating her," I said, lifting her chin, forcing her to look at me. "And you're afraid." Her pupils constricted. "You're afraid your mother won't belong only to you anymore. You're afraid she might start pursuing her own happiness." My thumb brushed away a tear from the corner of her eye. "Admit it, Lyra, you're insanely jealous. Ever since you were little, you felt like you were in her shadow. That cold attitude is just a shield." She shoved me away, her back hitting the concrete wall with a dull thud. "I'm not," she screamed, her chest heaving. Her sweatshirt collar was askew from the struggle, revealing one shoulder and the black strap of her sports bra. I'm just. I waited for her to finish, but her eyes suddenly shot past my shoulder and her face went deathly pale. Serafina was standing in the doorway of the stairwell, a shopping bag in her hand, her lips trembling. Her dress was back on, but the flush on her neck hadn't faded. The three of us stood in a silent standoff until the mall's PA system crackled to life. "Attention shoppers. Due to a severe thunderstorm warning, the mall will be closing early." The humid night. The mall's emergency lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows as the storm raged outside. We were crammed into the back of a taxi, rain lashing against the windows, smearing the city's neon lights into abstract art. Serafina sat between us, her knee pressed against my thigh on one side and Lyra's on the other. Her jasmine perfume, soaked by the rain, mixed with the scent of new silk from a shopping bag, creating a dizzying aroma in a confined space. This address, please." Serafina showed her phone to the driver. The screen displayed a 4-star hotel just a few blocks away. Her finger was trembling. The phone's lock screen was still a photo of Lyra from her high school graduation. Lyra whipped her head around. "Why are we going home?" "The National Weather Service issued a flash flood warning," I said, pointing to a tree branch that had snapped and fallen onto the sidewalk. "Your neighborhood is in a low-lying area." Serafina nodded, almost imperceptibly, her lips so close to my ear I could feel their warmth. "The tonic. I can't control the effects." Her breath was scorching, thick with the sweet scent of silver sage. "I don't want Lyra to see." From the other side, Lyra grabbed her mother's wrist. "Mom, what are you whispering to him about?" The taxi screeched to a halt at a red light, and all three of us pitched forward. Serafina fell into my lap, and Lyra, trying to grab her mother, ended up halfway on top of both of us. For a dizzying moment, my senses were overwhelmed by two distinct scents: the jasmine in Serafina's hair and the sharp citrus of Lyra's. Two different temperatures seeped through their damp clothes, one burning like fire, the other cool as jade. The driver shot us a knowing look in the rearview mirror. The hotel lobby was blindingly bright. "How many rooms?" the front desk clerk asked, her eyes flicking between the three of us. "Two," Lyra snapped, slapping her student ID on the marble countertop. "My mom and I will take one. He can have his own." But Serafina placed a hand on her daughter's. I imagine you're quite busy tonight." She looked at the clerk, the tips of her ears glowing red. "Do you have a suite available?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. With the storm, we're almost fully booked. All we have left is one deluxe king room." The clerk tapped at her keyboard. "The bed is quite large, though, over 6 feet wide." Lyra gasped. I pulled out my ID. "We'll take it." The elevator ride was silent enough to hear our own heartbeats. Serafina stared at the changing floor numbers. Lyra stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls. And I stared at the beads of sweat gathering on the nape of Serafina's neck. She had changed into a fresh blouse, but a small patch at the collar was already damp, revealing the black lace straps of the Midnight Passion set she'd bought. The moment the hotel room door opened, Lyra rushed in, grabbed a pillow from the bed, and threw it on the floor. "I'm sleeping on the couch." "Don't be ridiculous," Serafina said, bending to pick it up. The hem of her skirt rode up, revealing the sheer fabric of her stockings. "Your back will be a wreck. You have exams tomorrow." I set down our bags, deliberately walking between them. "I can take the floor." The bathroom's glass wall reflected our distorted figures. Lyra suddenly grabbed my arm. "You sleep on the bed with my mom. I'll sleep on the floor." The air crackled. Serafina's eyelashes fluttered violently as her fingers nervously toyed with a shopping bag containing her new nightgown. I looked into Lyra's defiant eyes and understood. This was a test, a self-sacrificing ploy to gauge the nature of my relationship with her mother. "Let's draw lots," I said, pulling 3 bills from my wallet. "Whoever gets the 20 sleeps on the couch." Lyra eyed me suspiciously but drew a bill anyway. A 10. Serafina drew a 5. I unfolded my hand to reveal a crisp $20 bill. "Looks like I'm the lucky one." Lyra snatched the bill from my hand, holding it up to the light, searching for any sign of a trick. She had no way of knowing all 3 bills had been 20s. I'd simply used my thumbnail to quickly scratch the ink off the other 2 as they drew. At 12 a.m., the storm was still raging. I lay on the sofa, listening to the faint sound from the bedroom. I could hear Serafina's soft, gentle voice cooing as she tried to lull her daughter to sleep. Lyra's initial mumbles eventually faded into the sound of steady breathing. Then a soft rustle. Serafina appeared barefoot at the edge of the sofa. Moonlight filtered through a gap in the curtains, illuminating her figure, clad only in a black lace nightgown, the one from the store. It was a silhouette of shadows and suggestion, the delicate fabric rising and falling with each breath. "Kale." She knelt on the carpet beside me, her voice a choked whisper. "Help me." Her fingers closed around my wrist. They were burning. The full force of the crimson root had hit its peak in the dead of night. Her pupils were dilated, and her neck and collarbone were flushed a deep crimson. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice low as I placed my fingers on her wrist to check her pulse. "Here." She guided my hand to her chest. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, fast enough to burst. "And here." My hand was led downwards. Just as my fingers were about to brush the hem of her nightgown, a sharp creak came from the bedroom. Serafina froze, snatching her hand back. In her panic, she knocked over a glass of water on the coffee table. As the glass shattered, Lyra's voice cut through the darkness. "Mom." Serafina was paralyzed. I quickly threw the sofa blanket over her, but it was too late. Lyra stood in the bedroom doorway, her phone held high, the camera's flash illuminating her mother's half-exposed shoulder and the ghost of my handprint on her waist. Our 3 breaths tangled in the dark. Lyra's fingers tightened, and the phone in her hand made a sickening cracking sound. What the hell are you two doing?" "Broken boundaries." No. It hurts so much." The sound of the phone hitting the carpet was like a slap across the face. Lyra moved faster than I could have imagined. She lunged forward, grabbing the silk strap of Serafina's nightgown. The sound of tearing fabric was unnaturally loud in the silent room. "Mom, look at yourself." Lyra's voice was choked with sobs, her fingers digging into her mother's bare shoulder. "Do you have any idea what you look like right now?" The nightgown was ripped open, exposing the black lace underneath to the cold moonlight. Serafina's pupils were still wide, the tonic slowing her reactions. She only seemed to snap out of her daze when Lyra's cold tears splashed on her collarbone. "Claire, he drugged you, didn't he?" Lyra whirled on me, her eyes feral, like a cornered animal. "That crimson root crap, it's just some kind of aphrodisiac, isn't it?" I stood up, the shards of broken glass crunching under my feet. Serafina instinctively leaned toward me, and that tiny movement sent Lyra over the edge. "You're still protecting him?" She grabbed the hotel's water kettle from the desk and hurled it against the wall. Hot water and tea leaves exploded outwards. "You both make me sick." A splash of hot water hit Serafina's chest, and she let out a soft hiss of pain. I grabbed the blanket to wrap around her, but Lyra intercepted me. "Enough." She stood between us, her own pajama top twisted from the confrontation, revealing a pale, smooth shoulder. "I'm taking my mom to the hospital to get her stomach pumped right now." Suddenly, Serafina grabbed her daughter's wrist. "It's not his fault." Her voice was as light as a feather. "The prescription. I changed it." The room fell deathly silent. Lyra's face was a frozen mask of disbelief. "What? The ratio of ingredients?" Serafina stared at the floor, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. I reduced the amount of silver sage by half." My head snapped toward Serafina. No wonder the effect had been so overwhelming. The crimson root was intensely warming and needed the cooling properties of the sage for balance. She had deliberately sabotaged the remedy, actively seeking this loss of control. Lyra stumbled backward, her back hitting the wall. Her gaze darted between her mother's flushed face and my own shocked expression, and then she started to laugh, a ragged, heartbreaking sound. "So it was you," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Serafina. "You were the one trying to seduce him." Serafina's eyelashes trembled violently, but she didn't deny it. Lyra's laughter died in her throat. She ran for the door, but just as her hand touched the knob, my voice stopped her. "Don't you want to know why?" I called out. "Why your mother would rather do something like this." "Shut up." Lyra's shoulders shook. "You're both insane." I crossed the room in 3 strides, blocking her path. Up close, her eyes were bloodshot, and she'd bitten her lip so hard it was bleeding. "Your mother hasn't been with a man in 10 years, I said, looking directly into her eyes. "Not since your father cheated on her and left. Those antidepressants numbed her to everything." My voice softened, until my remedy started to wake her body up. Behind me, I heard Serafina begin to sob. I glanced back. She was curled in the corner of the sofa, the torn nightgown slipping from her shoulders, revealing large patches of rosy skin in the moonlight. She looked like a beautiful, broken doll. Lyra's gaze drifted past me to her mother. Her expression shifted from rage to confusion, finally settling on a deep, profound sadness. "Mom," she let go of the doorknob, her voice suddenly small. Are you that lonely?" Serafina looked up, tears streaking through her makeup. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words were drowned out by a sudden, piercing shriek. The smoke detector on the ceiling flashed red, and the fire alarm began to blare throughout the hotel. The steam from the shattered kettle had triggered it. "Lyra, you've had a crush on Cale for a long time, haven't you?" Amid the piercing scream of the fire alarm, the hallway erupted into a cacophony of panicked shouts and running feet. But Serafina's condition was getting worse. Her skin was flushed an alarming shade of red, her hands clutching the torn remnants of her nightgown, her breathing shallow and rapid. The overdose of crimson root, amplified by the chaos, had sent her system into overdrive. Her pupils were fully dilated, and sweat beaded on her neck. "Mom." Lyra knelt beside her, frantically trying to cover her exposed shoulders with the blanket. "Can you stand?" Serafina just shook her head, her lips trembling as she forced out a single word: "Hot." Her fingertips brushed against the back of her daughter's hand, and Lyra recoiled from the heat. This was bad. If this continued, she could be in real danger. I quickly grabbed my leather case and unzipped it, But Lyra blocked my path. She seized my wrist, her nails digging into my skin, but her eyes were no longer filled with anger. They were filled with a desperate plea. Save her. Lyra's voice was torn to shreds by the wailing alarm. Please. In that moment, Lyra Vance's icy mask completely shattered. The hallway was a river of fleeing hotel guests. The three of us were huddled under a single blanket, Serafina wedged between us, half carried, half dragged toward the exit. Her steps were unsteady, her burning breath ghosting against my neck. Just hold on, I murmured, my arms securely around her slender waist. We're almost to the stairwell. On the other side, Lyra clutched her mother's hand, her own face as white as a sheet. She kept glancing around nervously, terrified someone would notice Serafina's state. Of course, the more you fear something, the more likely it is to happen. At the top of the stairs, Serafina's high heel caught, and she pitched forward. I yanked her back, but the sudden movement caused the blanket to slip off. Serafina's black lingerie was starkly visible under the red emergency lights, the ties on her back completely undone, her heated skin pressed directly against my shirt. Oh my God! A woman on the stairs below us gasped. Is that lady? Lyra reacted with stunning speed. She whipped the blanket back around her mother and shot a venomous glare at the onlookers. What are you looking at? My mother's having a hard episode. Haven't you ever seen that before? Her voice was sharp and commanding, dripping with the authority of a campus queen. The crowd immediately parted. Someone even kindly offered a bottle of water. But Serafina was only getting worse. Her body began to tremble uncontrollably, and soft, animalistic whimpers escaped her throat. I knew this was a sign of the tonic overloading her system. If I didn't do something to disperse the energy, it could lead to serious complications. Move aside. Let us through. The voices of firefighters echoed from the floors below. Suddenly, Lyra yanked me by the collar, pulling me into a dark corner of the landing. Her eyes were wild in the dim light. The needles, she said, her words clipped and urgent. Do it now. I stared at her. Here. It's better than having her carted out on a stretcher for the whole world to see. Lyra gritted her teeth, but her hand was gentle as she stroked Serafina's sweat-drenched forehead. I'll block the view. I settled Serafina against the wall on the landing. Lyra stood with her back to us, spreading her arms and the blanket to create a makeshift screen. I pulled out a set of sterilized silver needles. This might feel a little strange, I said softly, inserting the first needle into a pressure point on her neck. Her head was tilted back against the wall, her long neck forming a graceful arc. As the needles went in one by one, her breathing began to even out, though the deep flush on her cheeks remained. When I placed the last needle in the fleshy part of her hand, she suddenly grabbed my wrist. Kale, her voice was a mere sigh. Am I a horrible person? The silver needle quivered against her pale skin. I looked into her damp eyes, which held a mixture of shame and a raw, honest longing. No, Serafina, I said, choosing my words carefully. You've just forgotten how to be yourself for a very long time. A tear escaped and traced a silent path down her cheek. Is it done? Lyra asked, turning around just in time to see her mother crying. Her expression froze for a second before she collapsed to her knees, wrapping her arms around Serafina and burying her face in her shoulder. I'm sorry, Lyra's voice was muffled. I shouldn't have said those things to you. The firefighter's footsteps grew louder. I quickly removed the needles, but as I pulled the last one out, Serafina's hand closed gently around mine. Her palm was still hot, but the trembling had stopped. Thank you, she whispered, a small smile grazing her lips. She was still crying, but she had never looked more beautiful. Lyra looked up, her gaze shifting between her mother and me. Her expression was impossible to read, but when I reached out to help them up, she didn't pull away. At 3 a.m., we were in a temporary shelter set up in a nearby community center. Serafina was wrapped in a blanket, leaning against a wall. The effects of the tonic had subsided, leaving only a faint, rosy glow on her face. Lyra sat beside her, her head resting gently on her mother's shoulder, as if she were a child again. I brought them 2 cups of hot tea. When Lyra took hers, our fingers brushed for a fleeting moment. That crimson root, she said, staring into her cup. Is it really just an herb? Serafina coughed lightly, the tips of her ears turning red again. The Hayes Apothecary Guide states that crimson root is primarily used to treat deficiencies in vitality and core strength, I recited, trying to keep a straight face, though in your mother's case, the dosage was kale. Serafina chided, her voice a mixture of embarrassment and affection. Lyra looked from her mother to me, and then a small laugh escaped her lips. It was a surprising sound, like a ray of sun breaking through a storm cloud, illuminating her exhausted face. So, she twisted a strand of her hair around her finger. What does this make us? The question hung in the air. Serafina's breathing quickened, her fingers nervously picking at the blanket. Lyra stared at me, her eyes holding a dangerous, challenging glint. Just as I was about to answer, the doors to the shelter opened, and a paramedic walked in with a clipboard. We're looking for Serafina Vance. We just need to do a routine check. Serafina immediately began smoothing her hair, while Lyra instinctively stood up, positioning herself in front of her mother. I looked at their two faces, so similar in profile, and I realized that this absurd, chaotic night might have been exactly what this family needed to put itself back together. As the paramedic approached, all three of us reached for each other, our fingers intertwining under the cover of the blanket. Epilogue, a new prescription. The Vance house was quiet. Lyra had just stepped out of the shower, leaving the bathroom filled with steam. Wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping, she was applying moisturizer when the door opened without a knock. Serafina leaned against the door frame, wearing only a silk chemise, a glass of red wine in her hand. Mom? Lyra frowned. What's wrong? Serafina didn't answer. She simply walked in and locked the door behind her. The temperature in the small room seemed to rise. Lyra, she said, her voice soft as a feather, you've had a crush on Kale for a long time, haven't you? Lyra froze, her hand hovering over a jar of face cream. What are you talking about? Serafina took a slow sip of wine, the red liquid staining her lips. She moved closer, the bathroom light catching the curve of her collarbone. When you were 12, you hid his school photo in your textbook. At 15, you filled a diary with his name, surrounded by little hearts. Lyra's breath hitched, a faint blush spreading across her chest. That was a long time ago. It doesn't mean anything. Serafina closed the remaining distance between them, her scent of jasmine and wine enveloping Lyra. And what about now? She whispered. Are you really supervising me every night because you're afraid I'll be taken advantage of? Or are you afraid that your mother is going to steal the man you've been in love with for years? Lyra's eyes widened. All the air seemed to leave the steamy room. I'm not. Lyra, Serafina's voice softened. You're my daughter, of course I know. With that, Lyra's defenses crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes. Fine. Yes, I love him. She cried out, her voice echoing off the tile. I have, since we were kids. So what? He only has eyes for you now. He makes you tonics. He gives you treatments. He sneaks into your room at night. Do you have any idea how much that hurts? Serafina listened silently, then pulled her daughter into a hug. I know, she whispered. That's why I'm asking you now. She pulled back, looking into Lyra's tear-filled eyes. If I love him too, will you hate me? Lyra was speechless. You don't have to answer, Serafina said softly, her voice barely audible. But I need you to understand. For 10 years, you've been my everything. But if I have the chance, I won't be a woman again, too. She unlocked the door and left, leaving Lyra standing alone, the towel having fallen to the floor. The day Serafina took off her wedding ring, the sun was shining. She placed the platinum band on her vanity, where it came to rest next to the prescription for crimson root. Mom. Lyra stood in the doorway, holding a freshly prepared tonic. Her eyes fell to the ring. Throw it away for me, Serafina said quietly. Lyra put down the bowl, but picked up the ring and slipped it into her pocket. No, she said, the tips of her ears turning red. I'll have it melted down, made into a pair of earrings. Serafina turned, a gentle smile on her face. All right, she said, her hand now bare, resting on her daughter's shoulder. One for each of us. My herbal medicine lessons became Lyra's new favorite pastime. You insert the needle at a slight angle here, I demonstrated, holding an acupuncture needle. Lyra leaned in close, her hair brushing against my arm. This point affects the digestive system. She grabbed my hand. Is this the point you used on my mom the other night? The afternoon sun streamed through the clinic window, illuminating her amber eyes. Ever since the storm, Her gaze always held a certain probing quality, as if she were trying to decode a secret message in my every move. No, I said. For her, I used a point on the lower abdomen. Show me where. I gently tapped a spot on her stomach, just below her navel. She flinched and pulled her hand back, a blush rising on her cheeks, but she didn't move away. Next time, she said, biting her lip, I'm watching. Afraid I'll take advantage of your mother? Afraid your technique is sloppy? She playfully threw a packet of herbs at me. A soft laugh came from the doorway. Serafina stood there, holding a plate of cut fruit. She was wearing a stunning blue dress, and in her ears were two new studs, sparkling in the light, forged from a melted-down past. She placed the plate on the table, her fingers brushing against the back of my hand. Lyra's eyes darted from her mother's earrings to my hand. She then plucked a grape from the plate and popped it into my mouth. A gift from the student to the teacher. The grape was sweet. Her fingers smelled faintly of disinfectant. 3 new containers appeared in the Hayes family apothecary. The top shelf held the crimson root specimen and my father's old journals. The middle shelf held a glass jar of silver sage, which Serafina came to replenish every week. And on the bottom shelf sat a small mortar and pestle engraved with a Blackwood University crest, a graduation gift from Lyra. What is this? Lyra asked one day, gesturing to the cabinet. Your trophy case? I looked up from the herbs I was grinding. She was leaning against the shelves in her white lab coat, the sunlight from the window casting dappled patterns on her. It's my family, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then took the pestle from my hand. Crimson root and silver sage, she muttered, her head down as she began to grind the herbs. It's such a boring name. What would you call it? Serafina asked, walking in with a tray of tea, the slit of her dress revealing a length of stocking-clad leg. Lyra stopped, her gaze shifting between her mother and me. Pansy, she said suddenly. What? The flower, she said, dividing the ground powder into 3 small packets. It means, think of me. The room fell silent. The 3 of us reached for the packets at the same time, our fingers meeting on the edge of the porcelain bowl. The pungent scent of the root, the sweetness of the sage, and the faint sterile smell on Lyra's hands mingled together in the afternoon sun, creating an entirely new formula. Outside, the early summer breeze rustled the leaves like a soft, contented sigh. The Arctic confession. The Arctic tundra was bathed in the ethereal glow of the midnight sun. Above our glass-domed igloo, the aurora borealis danced like a river of emerald silk across the sky. Inside, Serafina, wrapped in a white cashmere blanket, swirled a glass of crystal-clear schnapps. She had traded her usual dresses for one trimmed with Arctic fox fur. Lyra had just emerged from the bathroom, pale from bouts of morning sickness, but with eyes shining brighter than the stars. She glanced at her mother's gently rounded stomach, then down at her own, and laughed. Mom, you cheated. Serafina's hand went to her own belly, which was slightly more pronounced than Lyra's. She placed my hand on it. Actually, she said, her voice as soft as the Arctic wind, it happened that night in the hotel when you accidentally kicked over my case of herbs. Lyra's eyes went wide. She deliberately interrupted my treatment of her mother that night, never imagining. I cleared my throat and placed my fingers on Serafina's wrist, feeling her pulse. It's strong and steady, like rolling pearls. It's twins. Lyra shot to her feet. Hail you. Before she could finish, Serafina pushed a specially prepared non-alcoholic crimson root tonic toward her. Drink this. It's good for the baby. Why does she get twins? Lyra fumed, half jealous, half furious. Serafina laughed, leaning back against the plush pillows. Because, she said, winking at me, someone was treating 2 patients that night. Lyra, speechless, could only grab a handful of sage leaves and toss them at us. I caught her, pulling her into a kiss, while Serafina's fingers traced a word on my back, Pansy. Outside the glass dome, the northern lights painted the sky in shades of red, silver, and violet. Inside, the fire crackled, reflecting 3 overlapping shadows. Addendum, the apothecary. The bottom shelf of the cabinet now holds a sandalwood box. Inside, Serafina's divorce certificate placed next to a diamond ring, Lyra's medical degree and her first sonogram picture, 3 round-the-world airline tickets, and a photograph of the aurora borealis. 3 tiny footprints pressed in clay, next to a new prescription label. It reads, Pansy, permanent collection.